Okay, thank you all for being here. I have the microphone on just because my voice doesn't carry very well, so, but can everyone hear me okay right now? Great. So today we're going to talk about internships, how, why, when, all of the logistics, all the nitty-gritty, hopefully cover all of your questions. But I do want to make sure that I get all of your questions and we don't just save them towards the very, very end, because if you're getting antsy and you want a particular answer now, I want to answer it as soon as possible. So if you have questions, I'm going to write them down over here so that I remember to look over here and answer them consecutively during the presentation. So what are your major concerns in doing an internship? Just let them go. Okay, PI. I'll just write PI. I think that's pretty big, yeah. What else? Yeah. Finding one, okay. The finding one wasn't necessarily in my presentation, so I'm glad that you asked that, because now we can talk about it specifically. Yeah. Okay, competitive application. Again, not necessarily in my talk, so this is perfect. What else? Okay, well that's okay. We're going to go over everything and there will be time for questions at the end, but I just wanted to make sure I got your big outstanding things on your mind before we started. So my name is Rhea Daugherty. I'm the Associate Director at BioSci Careers. If you haven't heard the announcement yet, we just changed our name to BioSci Careers from the Stanford School of Medicine Career Center, which is why you have the fancy new pins in your hand. You are welcome. Okay, so we already discussed concerns regarding internships, and again, we'll go over those in a little bit more depth. Feel free to interrupt me at any point in time if you have a question. So the agenda today, plus the things we just brought up for questions, are what's your personal goal of doing internships? So why do an internship? Which I think is often an understated thing that we should talk about, because internships kind of come up as, oh, I want a job outside academia, internship. When in fact there are many different things you could do and reasons to not do an internship. So that's part of the reason we're discussing that. What you should know, so logistics, how the hows and the whens, and then negotiating, so that's when the PI gets brought up a little bit more, how to package that, etc. Okay. So the goals of an internship. So this is going to be a little bit of audience participation in this. So why do an internship? What would be your goal of doing an internship? Why do one versus anything else? Yeah. Yep, so your foot in the door, that's often said. That's a great one. Why else would you do an internship? It's pretty valuable time to just take off. Yeah. Yeah, so if you like it. So that's a big one. And that's a good, what I would say judgmentally as a good reason to do an internship, particularly if you're interested in a specific company. So say you've always had the dream of working at Facebook. Well, you don't really know what it's like to work at Facebook until you've worked there. So an internship is a great way to do that. Versus, let's say, a part-time consulting where you work there 5 hours a week for the next 6 months. Because you don't really know what it's like to work somewhere if you only work there 5 hours a week. You're probably getting everyone on their best behavior versus what it's like to work there 40 hours a week full-time. So that was a good point. What else? Why else do an internship? Some people say making connections. So getting your foot in the door, that was a side bit. Also making connections. So getting to know the people at the company specifically. Those two, the reason I'm not expanding on them too much is I'll talk about how you can get those two, making connections and getting your foot in the door, in other ways. So why else do an internship specifically versus a class or consulting or anything like that? Right. So getting to explore your interests more specifically. Yeah, so that's a good one. There are also different ways to do that, but getting that hands-on experience is really important. So I can tell you're all tired in the afternoon, so I'll spare you the constant class activities here. But something that wasn't mentioned was enhancing your skills. So you don't have to just do an internship to get your foot in the door and all that jazz. You can do an internship because you know you need to be good at something that you're not necessarily good at yet. So let's say at Genentech you see this amazing job in chemical assays, and you realize that you don't have a lot of chemical assay experience, and in order to get a job like that, you're going to need that. So you could do an internship specifically in this different field. So you don't have to be an expert to do an internship, and in fact, I would suggest not being an expert in the field that you want to do an internship in, otherwise why spend 3 months of your time doing it? So exploring career options, that's sort of what you said, getting an idea of what's out there, because you don't know until you're necessarily out there. This is a big one that no one mentioned as well, is gaining work experience. So I can tell you the really, really annoying thing about industry is you need 5 years experience of industry experience to work in industry. So it's like, oh, you can't work unless you have 5 years, but how in the world are you supposed to get that 5 years if you can't work? So an internship is a fantastic way to get work experience. So I would say if you're interested in industry and you're interested in a more associate level position, which I'm guessing you are as PhDs and postdocs, getting experience, work experience is extremely valuable. And you don't necessarily need it through an internship, but that is one easy way to get it, or an easy way to get it. Networking, so obviously I mentioned that you can definitely build your network. More of the soft skills, it builds your confidence. So when you're preparing an application, half the battle is feeling confident in yourself. So I know you've probably heard the statistic of like how many qualifications you need in order to apply for the job. And at the Career Center, we suggest 50% is worth applying to, whereas most women only apply to a job if they're 90% and men more like 60%. But we really say 50% because the employers change their mind halfway in what they're looking for, and so you just need to apply. To develop your resume CV, which goes along with the others. And finally, a bridge to a full-time job. So again, if you have the dream of working at Facebook, you're going to get a lot more likely to get a job at Facebook if you have that work experience. So what is a quality internship? So I love this quote. It says, if you don't value your time, neither will others. Stop giving your time away. Stop giving away your time and talents. Start charging for it. So this is one of the biggest problems we see at the Career Center, which is students coming to us saying, I don't know what I want to do. I don't want to do academia. There's this opportunity. It's free. Well, it's free for me. They're not charging me, but I'm not getting paid either, and I'm just going to do it for a couple months for free. And no, absolutely not. You are very highly qualified individuals where if you were going on the job market right now, you could be making anywhere between $70,000 and $150,000. So there is no reason you should not be paid for your current internship. So if that is something that you're struggling with, like this company doesn't have a great budget, you know, it's ultimately your decision, but anytime we're on your side about this, we will not let you do an internship morally without you getting paid. So definitely along the way, remember that your time is valuable. Grad students and postdocs, I know you don't get paid well, but whether you should or not is a different story. In the industry, you should. So remember that. In addition, during this time, you should have defined learning objectives and goals. So if you don't know why you're doing an internship, it might end up like that time you didn't know why you were going to grad school and just kind of went. So you want to make sure that you're going into your internship with an idea of what you want and what you want to get out of it. Otherwise, it's 3 months of pretty solid time. Clear definition of who's your mentor and who's your supervisor. So this can be an issue if you're in a big company and you just kind of get lost. You want to make sure you're getting the best experience you can, and it'll come with really good mentorship along the way. page, so I already elaborated quite largely on that, so I'll leave that be. Skills being developed are closely related to your career development. So it's nice if you get the opportunity to explore skills outside of what you currently have, but hopefully you're not doing an internship at the zoo when you have no hope of ever working at the zoo. You know, you don't want to take time off just to do it. Hopefully it's useful. Okay. So alternatives. So there are many, many other things you can do other than an internship. So are any of you from Stem Cells, the department? Stem Cells? Nice, okay, so you a couple. So you have this amazing thing called the immersion program, which is I love Stem Cells for doing this. So it's basically a quarter where you can choose what you want to do, but you have to immerse yourself somehow. And you can do that through an internship. You can do it through classes. You can do it through grand rounds. You can do basically whatever you want as long as it is outside of your current project and it's required. So I like to think of internships as your immersion. So don't just do a 3-month internship because it sounds cool. When you're thinking about how you want to package this to your PI and to your lab and to your work, make sure it's reasonable and a good fit for you to do an internship. So alternatives are you could develop those skills in lab. So if you notice there's a job that calls for biochemical assays, collaborate with that lab down the row and try and get a new project where you would develop those skills. You can do coursework. So the Career Center has a lot of different courses that I'll show at a later slide. There's also Ignite program, which people love, that's very big in business, and various certificates. So for postdocs, for example, there's a teaching certificate if you're interested in teaching, and the Career Center is working on other ones as well. Part-time work, this is a really nice one. If you cannot feasibly take 3 full months off, part-time is nice. So some people say consulting, where you'll work at a company, generally a smaller one because they have less rules around that, and you can just work for a couple hours a week for extended period of time. Again, the drawback of that is if you're really interested in working in the company, remember that you're not going to truly understand what it's like to work there until you work there full time. Remember your first year lab rotation that you thought was going to be perfect and then you joined and you saw all its errors along the way? It's exactly the same. So you're not going to truly understand what it's like to work there unless you do. So networking events are another way to gain connections if that's all you're looking for. So we have career fairs. We have 2 of them. Beam has some if you're interested. Meetup, the app, has several Silicon Valley meetups for business-interested, startup-minded people, various conferences. So don't forget about those options. And trainings at a variety of different places, at Cold Spring Harbor, et cetera. Okay, so at BioSci Career Center, we like to say what we do just in case it was not abundantly clear, so you know all the different things you can take advantage of, because if you're in this room, it seems like you're looking for other options that you can do. So there's connections, which is mainly what I do, which is, so if you're interested in a job or a career, somebody asked that, where do you look? So currently, all of our options are on SciMed Careers database. And we are looking to expand this much more. So this is full-time and internships. So big companies like the ones I'm mentioning, Genentech, Facebook, will post their internships. But the big thing is not all places post. In fact, the majority of places do not post internships. So you have to do most of the hard work here, which is to find a company you like and then ask them about doing an internship. So for instance, if there's a startup you're interested in, there's no way they're going to post an internship. They're going to look through friends they know, et cetera. So if you're interested, you ask them, hey, here's this huge speech about what I'm interested in. Do you have room for an intern? I'd love to talk more. And again, they could negotiate with you on that. But that's annoyingly one of the best ways to find an internship is to find the company you want and ask them. And more likely that's the way you'll get it. But again, we have some posted on SciMed. The Industry Expo and Startup Career Fair I mentioned, as well as Industry Insights, Industry Onsites. So Industry Insights, we have Genentech and Myocardia coming on campus on December 11th, so look out for that. And Industry Onsites, I don't think we have any coming up right now, but we will soon. There's one-on-one coaching and counseling appointments that we highly suggest. If you have any questions about internships or a specific one, you can always make appointments later. And finally, curriculum. So we're running a class in January called CEO, Career Exploration Opportunities, where we'll walk you, handhold you through the process of applying for an internship and being ready for one. And we'll introduce you to various employers who are looking for interns. So if you are truly interested in an internship for sure, this is a great class to take. Actually, applications are up now if you check our website or our newsletter, so definitely apply if you're interested. We also have sector-specific classes, like if you're interested in consulting, we have a class for that that's actually coming up in spring. So if you don't have a great opportunity to do a 3-month internship, you could take a 2-week-long course in consulting, meet those employers, ask about internships, and go around that way. You don't get to say you have work experience, but you do get to say you have relevant experience in consulting. So that goes across the list, law, biotech, et cetera, as well as various workshops like what I'm doing now, as well as panels. So next quarter, we're going to do a project manager panel. So if you're interested in that career, come to that and network with those individuals. Okay, so what you should know. So here's all the nitty-gritty details, I'm sure, of what your concerns are. So the first thing is, how long is an internship? Well, it's typically 10 to 12 weeks. If you want it to be longer than 3 months, here's where the problem is. Your internship should be 3 months or less. If it is longer than 3 months, you can do it, but you are not eligible for housing and you are no longer eligible for health care. So if your employer is offering you free health care through them, that's fine. Those are your choice. That's your choice. But Cardinal Care will not support you past 3 months of not being a student on campus. So remember that, because we do have a few employers that were like, we'd love them for 6 months. Like, maybe, but are you offering health insurance? So make sure that's on your mind. And it must have advisor approval. I took a leave of absence when I was a student. Your advisor is required to sign this document. So you cannot, even if they're never around, they still have to sign it for this to be legal. So awareness. Funding. So this can be sometimes tricky. So if you have an NSF or an NIH, you will lose your funding during that time if you don't check sooner. So let's say you have an NSF and you just take a leave of absence. You will lose that funding during that quarter. So you won't get 3 months extra funding at the end of your fellowship. You'll just lose 3 months of funding. And your PI will probably have a problem with that. So you want to check in a year before you do an internship, and double check with NSF and NIH and let them know that you're planning on doing this really important internship, and they'll say yes because it is good for your degree, but you have to let them know because they're funding you. So that is also a big awareness point. You need to know beforehand. An internship cannot be a last-minute decision, especially if you have these types of fundings. Housing, so you can take housing, you can still live on campus and do an internship, again, under 3 months. You will take something called a vacation quarter. So I know it's tricky because it's not technically a vacation, but that is the name of the document. And as long as you turn it in before the due date each quarter, which I believe is a couple weeks before the quarter starts, you should be okay. For timing, we highly recommend timing your internship around the quarter system, because you're not going to get paid for that quarter because you have to take a leave of absence. And you can't take a leave of absence through mid-quarter It's on the block schedule. So if you start your internship in October and go till February, you won't get paid from September to April because it's 2 quarters leave of absence. So be aware of that as well. Try as much as possible to organize it around the quarter system. Health insurance. So I mentioned that you'll get health insurance, and you will as long as it's 3 months or less. Cardinal Care starts on August 31st. So if you are not enrolled on August 31st, you will not get health care. So when you're starting your internship, you start it September 1st, and you end it August 30th. You cannot be on a leave of absence on August 31st. Sorry, you cannot be on an internship on 8/31. Because if you are, you will not get automatically enrolled in Cardinal Care. And as a student, postdoc, or a postdoc, it's different, but for a PhD, you are automatically enrolled unless you opt out, but they will opt you out if you're not enrolled on 8/31. International students, so it depends on your visa situation. So if you're F1, your student, you probably won't be able to get paid, and we can discuss different options. J1 and H1, it's possible, but you need to talk to Bechtel. They'll know more, as well as your rep. So we don't pretend to be the experts on international students, but we're happy to help as much as possible. Okay, so let me make sure I got finding one and competitive. So before I go into, yeah. Yes. Yeah, okay, this is a great question. So I'm getting ready to go into the negotiation part of this, where the talking to your PI part of the talk. But to directly answer your question, if your PI says, no, you cannot leave, I will not sign your leave of absence, if you leave, they could potentially, no, basically you have to work with your PI on it. You have to get their signature to get that leave of absence. Yes, you need to convince them. You need to negotiate with them. Okay. Yeah. So it's possible that basically as a postdoc, your PI is your employer, right? So in that way. So if you want to leave, for students, if PhDs, if they leave, the department is who pays for them continually. So if you leave as a student and you still get health insurance, your department covers it. For a postdoc, it's even more important to get that approval from your PI because they will fund your health insurance, maybe. So it's up to you to negotiate for them to cover your health insurance. Yeah, that could happen too. So that's a possibility where your PI says, yeah, for postdocs, where your PI says, yeah, you can go, but I'm not covering your health care because you won't be with me for 3 months, so why should I pay for your health care? And that's something you negotiate with your PI, or you can negotiate with your employer and say, hey, you don't have to cover my health insurance, but I've got a fee of $300 for cardinal care, or sorry, whatever it is for a postdoc, and I would really appreciate you helping me out. And then that's something you can negotiate, like, oh, I could start a day earlier if you do this, or something along those lines. So that's a part where you would need to advocate for yourself first and find out all those details. Yeah, so this is a whole different rant that we could go on many later days. But postdocs are this weird place where you are technically employed, but also learning. Interesting place. So students are technically students, here to learn. They're under the supervision of the department. Postdocs are in the middle where, you fight your own battle of trying to figure out if you're students or employees. And the university sort of treats you like employees. So in that way, that's why health insurance is that way. I won't say anything about fairness about that or anything, but unfortunately, that's the way it is. Any other questions before I move on to negotiating? So any details, logistics? Any other questions? Okay. Again, if you have any questions along the way, just let me know. And at the end, I'll save the end for how to create a really good application package. We'll just briefly go over it. Okay, so negotiating with your PI. So thank you for that question. So we've already gotten in the zone of how am I going to talk to my PI about this? How am I going to convince them that 3 months off is really worth it for them and for me? So there's 4 parts to this: assess, prepare, ask, and package, and I'll talk about each of them briefly. And this was modified from the Stanford GSB, so in negotiation. So these are resources that you can get outside of the career office. So the first one is analyzing or assessing your risk versus reward. You know your PI, you know how well, if this is a place you can negotiate. So the first question you have to ask yourself is this negotiable? Is an internship negotiable? And I think you should give your PI the benefit of the doubt and say yes, because you may have all of these scary thoughts about what they'll say, but unless you've asked before, you really don't know what they'll say. Can you change the outcome in a way that makes you better off? So probably, you just don't know. So if this is yes, if the reward of doing an internship is worth the risk of sitting down in your PI's office for an hour and negotiating this, then you move on to the next step. So I'll briefly touch on that, and then we'll move on here. So prepare. So this is by far the biggest stage, the longest stage that you will sit in thinking about this. So this is also where most people fall in this process, because there's this really interesting quote I have, which is, "We are struck by how many smart people act as if negotiation is simply improvisational theater rather than an interdependent process that requires planning and preparation, making strategic choices, and maintaining discipline." So it is not improvisational theater. You're not going in there with underprepared, just saying, well, what do you think? Well, this is what I think. You're really going in thinking, what is the best possible outcome for you? What alternatives are there? So okay, if your PI says no to 3 months, would they say no to 2 months? What about part-time? Why is it that they don't want you to go for 3 months? What interest does your PI and advisor have? And you may think nothing, like why in the world would they want me to go for 3 months? But actually we have a lot of data, and this is NSF and NIH approved data, that if you do an internship, your graduation rate does not decline. So just because you do an internship, it doesn't mean all of a sudden you're going to graduate in 5.5 years instead of 5. It actually is the same and sometimes even better, because you're not in grad school just to be in grad school anymore. You're not doing your postdoc just to do it. You now have a goal in mind. So when you leave your internship, generally you know better what you want to do. Even if it's not that internship, you know more of what you want to do. So you come to lab more thoughtful and more action-oriented. So it does not decrease your graduation time. How will you transition? So who's going to take care of your mice, your cells, your flies? Who's going to do that? For the next 3 months, what's going to happen with your collaboration? Are you on top of that? Are you thinking about it? When can you do this internship? You know, summer is collection quarter, so definitely you're going to need to do it in the fall because you'd skip way too many opportunities if you did it then. So thinking about this is really, really important. It shows that you have come at this in a thoughtful way, that you've considered your PI's needs and wants. So saying, I know it's really important to you that, you know, I'm here during this time, so I've thought about how my project could continue, et cetera. And the more specific it is, the more intelligent you sound. So the more specific your plan is, the more intelligent you sound about it, the more thoughtful you sound about it, and the more likely they're going to approve because they actually think that you've thought about it. Okay. So the asking stage. How do you ask that you can do this? So you've done all the thoughts, you've thought about it, you know what it would look like, you have your plan all scheduled out. How do you ask? So first of all, how you will engage. So you have to know your PI. My PI was kind of emotional, so I would send him an email first, let that simmer, and then meet with him next. So be emotionally aware of who your PI is. Is your PI reactive? Do they need time to sit on it, or do they get mad that you sent an email? Think about what their needs are in this. So what is the information that you have to share? Are you going to walk in and say, I was thinking maybe it would be a good idea if I did this, what do you think? Or are you going to walk in and say, I've done a lot of research, this is where I think my career goal is, I've planned this out, what can we do to make it better? That is a lot different information that you're sharing than, I think this might be good, I don't know, can I do it? That's way different. And what are the benefits? Again, you're going to talk about the benefits to you and your career, which presumably your PI cares about. You know, so give them the credit of caring about you, even if you don't always realize it in their own way. Okay, and finally, the other thing is, sorry, I almost forgot. So this is true in negotiation. If you make the first offer, so you're coming in and you're saying, listen, I want to do an internship, and here's what I've planned, and here it is. You have anchored the conversation. So you've said, here is best case scenario, all the things in place. So you've basically made your PI say no to that, so, or work with it. So you've put it on the table. You've said, here's what I want. So in the way that you've framed it, you've made them play ball with you. So you're not going in saying, can I do an internship? And then they get the option, yes or no. You're going in saying, this is really what I want. Here's the plan. What do you think of the plan? So they would have to say, no, I don't like your plan. Here's what we have to do, which is a lot harder to do than the first one when you said yes or no. So it's like when those, I don't know, those people that you walk by, they're like, do you care about hungry kids? And you have to say no in order to get them to go away. You feel like a dick. Like, that's exactly what you're doing there. You're framing the conversation differently. Okay. And finally, the whole package. So negotiating your career with the package. So you're not coming in to fight a battle. So don't think of this as a battle mentality. You want to pitch it in a way that you do all of this, here's my prep, and then you say, how can we talk about crafting an outcome to make it work for us? So this is an us conversation. This is not a me and a you. This is an us. How can we make this work for us? And again, that gets it committed to the idea. So you've pitched the whole thing and you said, so, that's my idea. How can we make it work for us? That's a lot harder to say no to than yes or no. Okay. And the one thing I'll say about that is pulling on my experience. So I took a leave of absence, as mentioned, and I knew my PI loved to mentor. I knew that was his thing. Whether or not I agreed with his mentorship style was totally different. I knew that he loved to mentor. So I pitched this idea of doing a leave of absence, and then at the end said, so this is my thoughts. I could really use your mentorship on this because I want to make this work for the both of us. And you could see his eyes light up in the sense of like, I get to be the hero today. And that was great. And he did. He helped me out so much and he was on my side. But I knew that he needed me to ask him for help because that's what he viewed his role as. So think about what kind of person your PI is. What do they want to do for you? Do they want to help you in your career? Do they want to be, the hero? Play into it a little bit. They're there to help you, and you want to ask it in a way that's the most helpful for both of you. So I'm not asking you to manipulate. I'm just asking you to be smart. Okay. So briefly, I want to talk about competitive application. So finding one we went over. For people that put PI, mentioned PI, did we talk about it enough? What about finding a job? I know that one kind of sucked because I just said there's some posted, otherwise you have to find them, but any other? Okay, so briefly for making a competitive application. So for this, I highly recommend making a one-on-one counseling appointment because then we can go over your resume, we can talk about, and again, you can make a one-on-one appointment before you even have an internship in line because we can tell you, oh, you're interested in biotech research at Genentech? Well, actually, you're going to be more competitive if you have this class under your belt. So why don't next quarter you take this class? So just so you know, there is a benefit to coming before last minute. But in general, when you make a good argument for an internship, you'd want to have your resume ready. The only place that's going to accept a CV would be academia, really. You're going to do something that's called a resume vitae, which is a 2-page long resume, is what we kind of slang call it. So a resume is 1 page. A resume vitae is 2 pages. And it's 2 pages because if you stick with research, you'll want to put your publications, your conferences, et cetera. So that extra page is really for you there. But if you're going into business, consulting, law, finance, venture capital, 1 page. So you really want to trim as much as possible. So making sure you have one of those ready. Generally, if it's a posted position, you want a cover letter. And that'll be a page. If it's not posted, which is, again, 75% of jobs, of internships, you want a really good intro email. And just to be annoying, I'm going to remind you that most internships and jobs come from networking. So if it's not posted, which again the majority aren't, the way you're going to find it is by talking to somebody. And the biggest tool that I use in connecting people is LinkedIn. So I'll go to LinkedIn, and if I'm interested in project management, because it's coming up next quarter, I would type project manager. And I would find people with that title in all of my network. And it would find first, second, and third. I would see who knows them, and I would introduce them. So for us, we will gladly introduce you with contacts that we know. So we would ask them, like, is it okay if we introduce you to a student who's interested? And if they say yes, we're happy to pass along their contact. So that is another way you can take advantage of the Career Center. So add any of us, and we'll be happy to help. I know none of those were super great answers because they weren't super concrete, but I think for that question specifically, it's a little better on an individual basis to find out what you specifically could bring to the table based on your specific internship wants. Okay, so we can definitely end early, but I want to get all the questions you have because this is really the nitty-gritty for you. So what questions do you have? Yeah. So I wouldn't ever say it's out of the question. It will be difficult for you to push that funding back 3 months. So the one thing I will say is if your lab has good funding, if you are a PhD student that by the time your internship is done, you'll still be in 4 years, so the department pays for you, or the biosciences pay for you, not your PI, sorry. It's a little easier to say, I want to do an internship, because then your PI doesn't have to pay for you. But no, it's not out of the question. The NSF and NIH do, they are pretty rule regulatory heavy, so you want to call as soon as you know anything. A couple months before, not going to happen. 6 months before, maybe. But just for safety's sake, we want to give you a full year because that's when you have to re-up your NSF is a year before. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-oh.
How we ended up doing it. Is that something? Or would it be more like talk with the PI first?
Well, let me give you all cards on the table. I got this job and then told my PI that I got the job and negotiated graduation. So from my perspective, that is a great negotiation tactic. I would view it less like, hey, I'm doing it, so help me out, and view it more as, I got this really awesome offer. I think it would be a shame to turn it down given my career hopes. You know, I have until 2 weeks from now to decide how can we make this work. I think having something in your hand is a nice card to have because then you're making your PI say no. The only thing I will say to that as well is if your PI feels less involved in the process, that could hurt them. So it could hurt their feelings. If you say, basically what you're telling them is, I've been searching for an internship without telling you because I want to leave the lab for 3 months, so here it is. And if they are if they get hurt easy, that is one sticky point you're going to have to work around. Because more than likely, they're going to want to feel like they're a part of your training, a part of your life. And by doing that search without them, you know, it could be hurtful. So it could be good, could be bad, depends on how you pitch it. Yeah. Sure. Mm-hmm. So you're not getting paid, your PI is still not paying. So the only person paying for your, the only time a PI is paying for your health insurance is postdoc. Otherwise, it's your department. So just to clarify there. Right, they're not paying your health insurance, your department is. So just clarify, it doesn't really matter, but clarify there. I have seen cases where a department will get really upset about the process and suggest that they will not pay for the student health insurance. I don't like to mention it because I think it's rare, but I think it's fair for you to know that sometimes that can happen. In that case, I would sit down and have a negotiation talk with your PI and the department leader and talk about, and we would be happy to attend as well, because none of this is written in stone. Like, I can't bully your department into paying for your internship health insurance, but it's really one of those things that we need policy around, and so we would gladly advocate for you on that. But it is rare. Generally, they pay for it. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. AAAS, yep. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that is not my 100% suggestion. You know your PI better than I know your PI. So if you think the best way to talk with your PI is to have an opportunity in hand and work with them with it, then you know better than I do. With my PI, if I came to them with an offer, they would be hurt by that. So I had to include them in the process and say, just so you know, I'm looking for jobs. And if you have... Yeah. So that was my case. So for you, you would say, just so you know, I'm interested in an internship. What do you think? And get their opinion. And in that way, you can figure it out. Again, if you feel like it's going to be a really tough decision, you could apply. And then if you get one, use it as a card. But remember that if you get it and turn it down, that is a company that you turn down that you might want to work with later. So, right. Yeah. So, I mean, we can discuss, it sounds like you might want to discuss your personal situation a little bit more later, so we can talk later, but that's generally my advice on it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh yeah. So we wouldn't be, so support looks like we're not going to be you, me, your PI. It won't be a conversation like that where we're all three in the room. It would be more like we call your PI, see if they have any suggestions about the internship process, what are their thoughts on it. So we try to engage them in a conversation, talk to them about what their reasoning is, let them know that we've been talking to you and this is what we think your goal is. So it's more of let's get the conversation going. And then ultimately, you would work with your PI or department, possibly, to discuss this. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So it totally depends on your sector. So I will say most companies think that the summer is the best quarter because they don't always, not everyone who runs the company is a PhD or postdoc. They don't know that you work the whole year. So they're like, oh, so they're off for the summer. And we're like, no, They're still here. So they think that you get the summer off. So generally, they are looking at the summer for your internship. So I will say that is the most common time. It is also the easiest logistically because sometimes you don't even have to take a leave of absence. You can just go because technically the summer is a leave time. But go through the process regularly, but summer is generally easier logistically. So for other companies, it doesn't really matter. They're pretty similar. I don't know, Elizabeth, actually, do you know if there's any specific cycles for different sectors? So consulting is over the summer for internships. Yeah, I can't think of any that have very specific cycles except consulting. It's very picky. But otherwise for internships, it's kind of a free-for-all, especially startups whenever they get funding. Or sometimes you can look out on our listserv. I'll send out blasts via SBSA discuss of people that are hiring, but in my knowledge, it's pretty random, just whenever they get funding. What other questions? Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So if they don't say, you need to ask because it doesn't always mean 3 months. Actually, if it doesn't say, it probably means it's negotiable. So it probably means, I mean, if they don't say, it could mean anything, but it likely means negotiable. So I would definitely ask because that happens. But again, you are on the 3-month time limit unless you can work longer and they will pay for your health insurance. So. Yeah, so part-time, so I know you'll laugh at this, but technically you only work 20 hours a week. So that other 20 hours is up for you to work part-time. So if you want to do 20 hours a week of non-research, that's technically how much you can work part-time. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest that given your workload and timing and all that if you can swing it. But if you want to do 10 hours a week for 6 months, I still suggest you talk to your PI, even if they won't notice you out of the lab for 10 hours a week, but you don't need any sort of form for that. You can just do it. So that is a sneaky way that oftentimes students will take, but again, I suggest talking to your PI. So postdocs, again, you're employees, so you should be working 40 hours a week. So that's different. Students, yeah. You can do part-time. So you're allowed to work outside the university, but again, in that case, because you don't, yeah, you'd have to talk to your PI. Yeah, and then Brian. Mm-hmm. So part-time is going to be very similar to internships, where they'll all be on the site. Anything we have will be on the SciMed database, and they post part-time, full-time internships. Part-time is even easier to negotiate than an internship if you are interested in working in a company that doesn't have a formal process like that. Again, companies like Genentech, Facebook, they're formalizing it all. But companies like startups in the area that you're interested in, there's no formalization on internships and part-time. So if you can say, and I'll say the benefit for them is that you're cheap. So even if you say, I want to be paid $30 an hour, which is slightly more than you're making now as a student, you'd say, I want to be paid $30 an hour for 5 hours a week. That's easy for them. Most of their employees are going to be making somewhere around $80 to $100 an hour. So it is so easy to negotiate that because you're very cheap and it is a wonderful experience for you. So remember that when you're negotiating for those part-times. Yeah. Yeah. So the SciMed database, every week I go through and just pick my favorites and put them at the bottom of the newsletter, and they're called hot jobs. So every Monday, so you got one today, every Monday you can check the bottom of the newsletter and it's kind of the hot ones. But Brian, you had a question? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a great question. I talked to Theo about this recently, actually, and according to him, there has never been a PI that said no. So you're on a good track record. But I would say because immersion is required, and so this is something we're hoping to do for all the departments because this is so awesome, because immersion is required, because of that, it is way easier to negotiate. So I would say it's possible that your PI could say, that's not the immersion I was thinking, let's talk about something else, but you already have your foot in the door for a really great opportunity. And if you make an appointment with us, we're happy to talk about ways to negotiate with your PI. And we also know the faculty around here, so if you say their name, if you're willing to talk about them, we can think about what's the best strategy for them based on what we know of them as well. So feel free to have a confidential conversation with us. Any last questions? Yeah, sure. Yes, so I didn't bring it with me, but at our office, so right outside our door in MSOB, there is a little booklet called PhDs and Postdocs, and it has a plethora of example cover letters, CVs, resumes for those that are interested in academia, consulting, business, et cetera. So if you're near MSOB, I highly recommend picking one up. They're free, they're for you, so if you stop by, we'll pass one out. And it gives you not only examples, but the how-to, so the first paragraph looks like this, second paragraph like this, interviewing, informational interviewing. It's kind of like the how-to of getting employment. So highly recommend.